Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Berry Aftercare, the podcast. And guess what? I'm really thinking I'm going to change the name of the podcast from Berry Aftercare to Berry Aftercare and Beyond, because the information in this podcast goes so far beyond just bariatrics. It's really about living a healthy lifestyle. No matter what you're trying to accomplish in life, the information that is presented here, of course, I gear it to bariatric lifestyle, but it's also relative to anybody who's trying to make overall improvements in their life. So there you go, bariatric care and beyond bariatrics. Maybe that'll be it. Let me know what you think. But today, the topic is the doom loop of irresponsibility. I really like that phrase, doom loop. I hadn't heard it until fairly recently. But now that I have heard it and I kind of know what it is, I think it's a great, great phrase. And we do doom loop, scrolling on the internet and, getting caught up in social media and looking at all the bad news going on in the world. Come on, it's not a good place to live. So let's get ourselves out of doom loops. And one of the doom loops we get ourselves into is being irresponsible. And you know how much I love Andy Stanley. Andy Stanley just did a 4-part series. Well, he hasn't even done the last one yet, but he's done a series and he's called it The Responsibles. So I'm going to take a lot of that information from his series and I'm going to give him full credit, because I always like to give people full credit, not steal their work and promote it as mine. And I want to tell you, if I could have just cut and paste parts of his messages into this, I would have, because he has such a great way with words. But I don't know that that's legal. But I want you to know that a lot of this comes from that series, and I will link the series, which is on YouTube. It's open to anybody. I will link the series in the show notes. And I want to be really, really clear at the outset, and as we move into this, that we are talking about the disease of obesity in this podcast specifically. And the disease of obesity is one example of a chronic disease. So I want to make it very clear that you and I are aware that we're dealing with a disease. And there are other chronic diseases, like one I have, addiction. There are other chronic diseases that I struggle with, like high blood pressure. A lot of chronic diseases, including obesity and addiction and blood pressure and diabetes and heart disease and many, many others, are chronic in the fact that we can't necessarily cure them. We can treat them, we can manage symptoms, but we're not responsible for having the disease to begin with. Now, there are things based on our lifestyle, absolutely, related to high blood pressure and diabetes and obesity and addiction, that we absolutely can engage in or refrain from. We have a lot of influence in terms of either exacerbating and making the disease worse, or doing what we can to kind of mitigate the symptoms. I have addiction, a chronic disease. I have high blood pressure, a chronic disease. I work very hard to take full responsibility for the aspects of those diseases that I can. For example, I choose not to engage in alcohol consumption or any other mood-altering drug that could lead to addiction. I also work on the other areas of addiction, the mindset, the thinking, the support people that I hang out with. All of that is part of my influences on the disease of addiction. I have the disease of hypertension, very inherited in my family. So what do people do to try to stave off the symptoms of high blood pressure? They exercise. I exercise at least 5 days a week for an hour. They don't consume much alcohol. I consume zero alcohol. They eat a healthy diet. I eat a healthy diet. I eat very few fried foods. I take good care of my health. So I'm taking responsibility for the things I can, and I have to accept the fact that I have these diseases. So it's important that you hear that message as we go into this topic about the doom loop of irresponsibility, because in no way, shape, or form do I want to send the message that I think you are responsible for having the disease of obesity. None of us are responsible for the inherited diseases that we have, or some of the bodily systems that aren't working in a way that would handle these things. So you're not responsible for having a disease, but as you know, I am a fair and firm person. So while I am understanding, and it's fair that we don't have control over having a disease or not, we have a lot of influence on whether or not we treat the disease in a responsible manner. So think about, I do these evaluations all the time, and I talk to people who tell me their parents have, heart disease, or their parents have diabetes, and yet they don't manage it well. They ignore the things that they could do to mitigate their symptoms, or to, not make the disease get worse. So it may be your parents, your grandparents, your friends, your family, the people at work that you see doing that, and it could also be yourself in some ways. So, very important. I'm not blaming anyone for having the disease of obesity. I am holding each and every one of us, including myself, regardless of the diseases that we have, for being responsible to manage their disease in the best ways that they can. Okay. Glad I got that off my chest. So listen with an open mind, all right? Because we want to live the best life that we can. And so if we have any diseases, we want to do everything we can to minimize the symptoms so we can live a full life, the life that you want, as healthy as you can be given the reality of the disease or diseases that you have, and being able to participate in as many of the things that you can, given the realities of these diseases. So onward and forward. So Andy Stanley calls his series The Responsibles. And he describes the responsibles as being superheroes, because these are the people who are taking full responsibility for their lives. They're taking responsibility for their past. They're looking into the future. They're looking at what's going on today in their world, and the internal state of their world, as well as the external state of their world. What he says about the responsibles, as he calls them, is they refuse, and I love this word, they refuse to make excuses for whatever. They refuse to blame other people. They clean up any messes that they make. We're human. We make messes. We will probably continue to make messes in certain areas of our lives. Some of us will make messes in the same area of our life over and over, but the responsibles go and they clean up the messes they're making. I'm sorry, I'm distracted looking out the window. There's a mama deer and a baby doe right outside my window. Oh my gosh, they're so darn cute. All right, we got to take time to enjoy what nature brings to our attention. All right, so responsibles. Oh my God, there's two babies. Clean up their messes, and they look around in the world. They take note. Am I carrying my load in my family, at work, with my children, with my partner, with my in-laws, with my community? Am I carrying my load? This is going to be a huge part of today's talk. And I'm going to tattle on myself as we go through this episode, because I like to make it clear that I'm just as human as the rest, right? And I continue to make a mistake in my life, and I make a little bit of a mess with my overreactions sometimes emotionally, most often in situations regarding my husband. So I created a little bit of a mess last week when I could have handled the situation in a few sentences, but I did what I do sometimes and I didn't let it go. I created part of the mess. He created part of the mess too. And when I say mess, the argument or lasted more days than it should, like not speaking for a while and a little bit of snarkiness, venting a little bit, but nothing like it used to get. So there's been progress, and that's what we're looking for in our lives, right? So Andy goes on to say that the responsibles, they understand. And this is critical. They understand that their irresponsibility becomes somebody else's responsibility. I'm going to come back to this over and over and over again. And that right there, the fact that when we choose to be irresponsible, we are dumping our responsibility on somebody else down the road. And my good friend is going through a situation where she is working very diligently on taking responsibility for a situation she created over years and years and years and years. And you may have a situation like this or know someone else who has a situation like this. And it started because she was helping to clean out her mother's house. And she would text me and say, oh my gosh, my mom has 6 sets of comforters and sheets in the bag or the package that it was purchased in, and she's got all these excess things. And she started going, you know what? I've done some of that in my life too. And I do not want my children to be responsible for cleaning up the years, the decades of clutter that I have created in my very large home. So we've been talking about her progress and how responsible she is being in taking care of these things, because if she chose to remain irresponsible and leave these collections of things all over the house, they would eventually become the responsibility of her children. And that's what responsibles try to avoid. We don't want to dump our forms of irresponsibility onto other people who will end up taking the toll from our irresponsibility. So let's put it in other contexts. Maybe you have a lot of outstanding debt, and maybe you have a lien on your house, or your grandparents or your parents, and they pass away, and you're leaving this mess for whoever your descendants or the people who are going to be left with the problems you left behind are. Or maybe you are involved in excessive shopping after weight loss surgery, and you're creating this pile of debt. It's not just affecting you, but eventually it's going to become the responsibility of your partner, your family, your children, because money that could be going to things your family needs is going to be going to clean up this mess that you made. So we are going to look at, in today's episode, am I taking responsibility for my life, for my actions, the things that I do or the things that I don't do? I either clean up the messes in my house or I leave it for somebody else eventually. Am I taking responsibility for my reactions? And this is where I'm using myself as an example. My reactions, so much better than they were years ago, still on occasion, like this past week, set into motion or contribute to an argument that lasts too long between me and my husband. So am I taking responsibility for my reactions? And again, if I mess up, because we all will, then I go back and I say, I overreacted and I understand how that contributed to this argument that lasted for too long. That's how we clean up our messes. That's how we behave in a responsible way. Am I being responsible with my obligations? My present obligations? I've made an obligation to participate and contribute to the bariatric care program that I have created. Am I being responsible for those things? What about my future obligations? So, for example, making sure I have a will, making sure that my will is in place so I don't leave a mess for my children. My father did not leave a will. The man knew he was dying. He had a chronic progressive disease, COPD. And toward the end of that disease, people get hospitalized more frequently. He has 6 children. And he knew it was going to be a mess. And he chose irresponsibility. He was a smart man. He had a good job. He took care of his finances. He was irresponsible in that regard. And when we are irresponsible, that lands as responsibility on other people. And it created a mess. So when I ask the question, are you responsible? You're like, well, of course I am. Yes, I am responsible. And I would say the same thing about myself at first glance. But you know people who aren't responsible. Think about who comes to mind. And then buckle your seatbelt, because we're going to point out ways that you and I can also be responsible. Not only can we, but we are in some ways. And I know that you're responsible, and I am responsible in the ways that most of us are responsible. Andy talks about most people pay their bills. They show up to work at time. I'm going to add some things here when it comes to you and me. If you've got children or a family, you are very responsible in terms of taking those kids to whatever practices they have to be at. You pick them up from school, you go to the school conferences, you get them to their extracurriculars, you remember your mother's birthday, you buy Christmas presents and birthday presents ahead of time, you send out the cards. You're responsible in so many ways. Absolutely. But in a lot of ways, especially things like going to work, managing to get there on time when we can't get on time for anything in our family. You know, most of the ways that most of us think of ourselves as being responsible, it's because, Andy says, you follow through what's expected of you because there's an immediate penalty if you don't. If I don't go to work, there's an immediate penalty. I don't get paid. If I don't pick up my kids from school and get there on time, somebody's going to call DFACS. If I don't have insurance on my car, there will be penalties if I get into an accident. So we do the things we do most often because there's an immediate penalty. That's darn good incentive, right? All right. So Andy says, we're not asking the question, am I a responsible person? The question Andy says to focus on is, am I taking responsibility for my life? Yes, you're a responsible person in many ways. Where are the areas you're not taking responsibility for your life? For your actions. And actions are things we do and things we do not do. For our reactions, for keeping my mouth shut, talking it through with a friend before I go to my husband, or bleh, right? Coming at him. I'm responsible for those things. And the way I go about those things, the way I take responsibility for my actions, my reactions, the things I do, the things I don't do, have a consequence. On my relationship maybe, or my bank account, or my friendships, or my job status. Are you taking responsibility for your life, Andy says? Ask yourself that for your actions, your reactions, your obligations, and your future obligations. And he's talking about we have to look at this in a broad perspective and look behind us and look ahead of us. And we have to own and take responsibility for things maybe we left unattended in the past and prepare for eventualities of the future. So an eventuality of your future, my friends, is you and I are going to die. And so we can prepare for our death, whether it's impending or far away. And we all hope it's far away. But a person who goes to the doctor and gets a really bad diagnosis and is told, get your affairs in order, they're talking about taking responsibility for the eventualities of the future. We don't have to know we have an impending death to be responsible for setting up our future so we don't leave a mess, so that our irresponsibility doesn't leave a pile of unwanted responsibility for other people. So Andy's whole series here, these sermons, these messages, were really about our irresponsibility. Our IR becomes somebody else's RE responsibility. And we just dump this stuff on other people all the time. So yes, we're going to look at this in terms of your weight. We have to. We have to look at this terms because this is a bariatric podcast in general, but it's also beyond, because I'm talking about all of us and all of these areas of our life, not just our actions related to our bariatric care lifestyle, but this is critical because Sandy asks, have you ever had to take care of someone else's mess? Do you, like I did, a parent who didn't leave a will? That was a mess with 6 children. Have you ever had to take care of a mess resulting from somebody else's irresponsibility? Think about it at work. Maybe you're working on a team and somebody doesn't pull their load and you're left working overtime hours that you don't want and don't get paid for because this job matters to you and you want to put forward a good presentation or a good product. What about group projects at school? I hated those things because if somebody was a slacker, i.e. irresponsible, the rest of the load fell on the rest of us. Now let's take a look at general, not weight stuff, just general stuff at home. You probably get irritated with your partner, your spouse, your children, your roommates who behave in irresponsible ways. Maybe they eat your food and don't replace it, or that can happen at the office, right? Or maybe the kids throw the towels and the clothes on the floor and are being irresponsible by not putting them in the hamper. Or you have kids who are old enough to do their own laundry and they're being irresponsible and then they yell at you because they don't have anything to wear to school. Or maybe that's your partner, or maybe that's you. Are there ways that you are not carrying your load, doing your share of things at the office, in your friendships, in your home? Maybe you are the person who said, yeah, I want to get a dog and I'll take care of it, and yet your spouse is the one picking up your irresponsibility. So when we are irresponsible in any way, shape, or form, we're dumping our responsibility on other people's. Now, if we got babies, and Andy talks about this in his message, babies make a mess in their diaper, right? They don't have any responsibility for not having those body functions yet, but the adults have to clean up the mess, right? We've all been in that position. Most of us have changed a dirty diaper. We know what it's like to clean up another person's mess. And there are situations in life where we are picking up somebody else's mess they're not responsible for, like a baby. Maybe you've got a critically ill parent. You know, some movie just came to my mind where the dad had really bad cancer and the son was home taking care of him. He was, the dad had diarrhea in the shower and those things are not what I'm talking about. The things that I am talking about, things that Andy was talking about in his messages, were things that you do have the choice. You do have the influence over, and you opt out. So think about it. Do you know somebody who maybe has a bad driving record, right? They got tickets, they got outstanding tickets, they don't have insurance on their car. That's being irresponsible. And if you get into an accident with that person, then your insurance has to pay more because that person was irresponsible in not insuring their own vehicle. What about somebody you know who may be drinking too much and their drinking seems out of control and you see it affecting their job and their family and their relationships and their children? That's a form of irresponsibility that a person can take responsibility for. And this is where I hold my parents responsible, right? It's not like they never heard of getting help. It's not like they weren't not presented with getting help. It's not like they didn't go to counseling 1 or 2 times, but they opted not to. They opted not to take responsibility, my father, for his alcoholism. And that was dumped on all of us. His moods, his temper, his irresponsible behavior with his actions and reactions got dumped onto all of us. What about with your eating? What about with your weight? What about with the use of credit cards? What about if you're in school and you're studying and your family has supported you in taking out these student loans and you're being irresponsible and you're not going to class and you're not turning in your homework and you've taken out enormous debt that's affecting your spouse and your children and their lives because you're not following through with your obligations. Now, this is going to be harsh to hear, but this goes right along with this topic that we're talking about. When you've had weight loss surgery, you implicitly agreed to make changes in your life. The dietitian very clearly spelled out how a healthy bariatric patient eats for the rest of their life. If you are being irresponsible and not doing that, you need to ask yourself, am I being irresponsible in this way? And how might my irresponsibility become somebody else's responsibility? Well, let me tell you how I've seen that in the work that I do. One of the episodes that I was on in one of the TLC shows, we had a teenager come in who was assuming a lot of responsibility for her mother's irresponsibility. No, her mother's not responsible for having the disease of obesity. Not what I'm saying at all. Her mother was responsible for getting help for that. Her mother was responsible for trying to let her children have the life of a children. But this child, as do many, many children who are living in a home where there's a disease, where a person, the adult, could take more responsibility but isn't, the child is left with a lot of responsibility. In this case, the mother would scream at the child if they didn't go get her the food she wanted. Well, the child wants to please the mom. The child wants to be a good girl. The child wants to make mom happy. How does this affect the child? She stays home when her friends are out doing things that teenagers should be doing because she's afraid that mom might fall when she's gone. She's afraid because mom has really bad struggles with her mobility. She's afraid because what if mom needs to go to the bathroom? Who's going to help her? Mom's irresponsibility is heaping responsibility on somebody else and really impacting their life in a negative way. I get that. But if that's you, take responsibility and do what you need to do. So if you've had weight loss surgery and you're finding yourself going back to those old habits that is leading to regain, think about how your lack of responsibility in not following through or not getting the help that you need to be better able to follow through is going to land on somebody else. Whether it's in the form of they're having to get you food that you don't want. They don't have to, but if you're going to bully them into it, you have to take accountability for that. I've had so many spouses say, my spouse who had surgery has told me they don't want me to bring these things into the house. They don't want me to get them food for, a love language. So I'm working really hard on that. But then they'll turn around and they'll tell me, but I want this food. You told me not to do that when you asked, but I want it. And then they have a fit. Those reactions. And so eventually, maybe the spouse gives in. So both people are responsible in that situation, but each of us has to take responsibility for our actions, our reactions independently. And we have to look at how our irresponsibility is damaging that relationship. Look at how our irresponsibility, if we engage in a lot of addictive eating or addictive spending or addictive whatever, and now we're mad at ourselves because we gave into something we no longer want to do, and we're in a bad mood. That plays over into how we talk to our kids, how we talk to our partners, how we engage with people at work, whether we're engaged in social activities or maybe we don't go to social obligations that we have already made, and therefore we dump the load onto other people. So when we talk about this, and Andy points out that anybody who's ever gotten a DUI or has ever had an unwanted pregnancy or has had to deal with, he refers to this as a self-inflicted health issue. If you have kidney problems but don't do the things that you're supposed to do to help with your kidneys, if you have high blood pressure but you don't take all the measures you can to manage that high blood pressure, including taking your medication, if you have the disease of obesity and yet you engage in chronically unhealthy eating, you refuse to exercise, those kinds of self-inflicted health issues, everybody who goes through these things say, it won't happen to me. I won't get immobility issues. I won't, my kidneys will be just fine. I'll never get a DUI. I can have unprotected sex. I'm not going to get a sexually transmitted disease. That's what we think. We think we're immune. We think, I got this, until we don't. And then Andy points out that let's say you're hanging around with a bunch of similarly minded, irresponsible people. In other words, you're hanging out with people who refuse to get a job, or the people who are skipping school with you, or the people who are, avoiding responsibility and playing games all day, or you're shopping with your friends even though all of you know that you've got these impending debts. So Andy says, irresponsible people don't turn to their irresponsible friends when their own irresponsibility catches up with them. Let me tell you how many people I work with who are the responsible adult in the family. They're out there working, they're busting their butt, they're doing what they can to help family members with critical things like medications or transportation or helping with the kids, get them to school or buy them clothes for school or school supplies. So the few responsible adults in the extended family, everybody else comes to them. The people who are being irresponsible. Can you give me money for this? I need this. Can you take me there? Can you drive my kids here? Can you pay for this for my family? Can I live with you and your family? So the people who choose to be irresponsible go to the people who are being responsible and dump their load on them. So Andy asks some pretty poignant questions. He says, who are you going to expect to rescue you? If you continue in unhealthy eating behaviors and you lose your mobility, who do you expect to help you? Probably your kids. Well, they should help me. Well, yes and no. I'm going to help people who are willing to help themselves. What are you going to do while asking them to help you as well? Whose future, this comes from Andy, whose future does your irresponsible behavior jeopardize? And I know that's painful. And I know that's hard to look at. And I know you probably want to turn the podcast off, but don't. Because your life has been jeopardized by people who engaged in unhealthy behavior before you. How'd you like it? You didn't. We don't want to be this person for somebody else. If I refuse to learn healthier responses when I'm frustrated or angry, I impact the life of whoever I'm angry with and dumping on. And I cause tension within my family. And so now my kids don't want to come around because mom and dad are fighting. I'm responsible for all of my own behavior. And as we do in the 12 steps, we make sure we go back and clean up those messes, not just for the other people, but for ourselves as well. And I'm going to go there in 1 second. But Andy has this, he makes up these silly little rhymes sometimes. And when he was talking about who you expect to rescue you, who do you expect to take up your responsibility because you were irresponsible? And he says, if I go on like this, whatever this is, spending, overeating, drinking too much, if I go on like this, I know where it leads. God bless those stuck taking care of me. So take a look around you. Read the room, friends. What kind of behaviors are you engaging in that are going to be dumped on somebody else down the road? That ain't fair. We don't have the right to do that. And the other thing is, here's the deal. And this is why in the 12 steps, this is me talking, but Andy also goes into why we need to clean up our past. And I think about my friend who I saw in my second trip to Iowa recently. And I thought she'd had weight loss surgery. And I'll tell you why I thought she had weight loss surgery. A, she lost about 85 pounds. And B, she told me where she was going through this program that they showed some of my videos. So I'm assuming it's a bariatric center. Well, they're doing what I'm not doing with Andy's video. They took my videos from YouTube and are showing it in this weight loss program. I never was asked if they could do that, but you know what? I don't care. I am all about get the word out. So I thought she had weight loss surgery, and she didn't. And so we were talking, and I was like, she has kept 85 pounds off for the past 5 years, and she is 65 years old, which is not an easy thing to do. A, change your habits. Take a look at your excuses you've been making. And that's what she said. These aren't my words. I said, well, how did you get the weight off, and how have you been keeping it off? She said, I looked at the excuses I was making. She took responsibility. I looked at the excuses I was making for the reasons I overate. She had a high-powered job. She was out eating a lot with high-powered executives. And she said, I didn't take responsibility for eating healthy when I was out. I didn't take responsibility for making time to exercise. So she is going back and looking at how she got here. And she's not making excuses. She's not blaming her job or her anything else. She said, I stopped making excuses and I started doing the things I knew I needed to do all along. Because she, like many people, have started in weight loss programs for 40 years of her life. And she said, I stopped making excuses. I became responsible. I was so impressed. And it's tough asking, am I taking responsibility for my life? And this comes from Andy's sermons, his messages. He says this is a challenging question because it makes us feel bad about ourselves. Oh, God, I guess I'm not. Right? And then we feel bad. And he says, you know what? There's actually something worse than feeling bad about ourselves. He says there's something worse than hurting your own feelings. And that, he says, is refusing to acknowledge it, refusing to address the something bad about ourselves. So I can say, yes, I respond harshly at times. And I could say, well, if he didn't talk to me that way, I wouldn't talk back to him that way. That's not taking responsibility, that's blaming. I could say, well, that's how my people talked in my family. That's not taking responsibility. Taking responsibility is, yeah, I don't like how he talks to me sometimes. And yeah, I have a family that no matter what, I'm responsibility. I'm responsible for what comes out of my mouth. And we lose something when we don't take responsibility. And what we lose is self-respect. When I talk harshly, when I say mean things, I don't like who I am. I lose responsibility. I lose integrity. I lose self-respect. I lose self-worth. And the interesting thing is, if somebody comes to you and says, you know what? I am so sorry for how my irresponsibility at work affected you. It put a lot more responsibility on you and you finished up that project. I am so sorry. How can I make that up to you? Does it make you feel worse about that person, or does it inflate them in your eyes? It inflates them in my eyes. If I go to my husband and I say, you didn't deserve how I talked to you. No matter what you said or were doing, I'm responsible for how I talked to you. And I said hurtful things, and I am so sorry. That brings him closer to me, not further away. And it brings my self-worth back to being intact. So when we're irresponsible and do things we know are going to hurt ourselves or others, we lose a piece of ourselves. But when we take full responsibility, we gain it back. And there's a lot of freedom from that. But if we're not willing to address things about ourselves that we're not pleased about, that we're embarrassed about, that we're ashamed about, that keeps us in this doom loop of irresponsibility, this doom loop of unhealthy habits, this doom loop of negative self-talk, this doom loop of dumping our crap on other people. And that's why I'm calling this episode the doom loop of irresponsibility. So, it's easy when we look at other people to see the results of their irresponsibility. I know a woman, buddy, this is not a position I don't think any of us would want to find us in. She has full custody of 4 grandsons because of the continued irresponsibility of the daughter who continues to produce these children. This woman, who's my age, probably wanted to be doing things that other people our age do. Working less, playing more. She is now raising more children than she had herself. Her daughter's consistent, irresponsible behavior in many areas of her life has been dumped on her mother. Now, her mother didn't have to accept responsibility for that, but if they're my grandkids, I'm taking them too. That's an extreme case, but let's look at our own lives, right? Because we're not going to be the exception. We're not going to be the exception. If we're irresponsible, somebody's going to have to pick up the responsibility. And again, I'm not talking about things like we're all going to grow old and we're going to need help. But what parts of growing old can we take responsibility for? Like I can continue to be responsible to get movement and to stretch so that I have more flexibility and more balance and I can take better care of my health. But there are going to be things that happen that I don't have control over, couldn't influence. But I'm responsible for all the way up to my old age to do the best I can, so I'm less of a burden on those that I love. Are you taking responsibility for your present? Have you cleaned up any irresponsibility from your past so that you get your integrity back, so you get your self-worth back, so you raise your esteem in other people's eyes? Ooh, here's a good one. This comes from Andy, and it's harsh, and he says it's harsh, but he talks about how easy it is to look at other people and go, God, if they'd only be responsible, why don't they just quit spending that money at the casino and pay their damn bills? Or, look at that girl being out there so responsible. Why doesn't she start using birth control? Or, why doesn't she take care of her own children? Or look at that person over there showing up late for work every day. Why do they think they keep getting fired? It's so easy to look at that, right? But if we refuse to look at our responsibilities for our health, and in this case, for how we treat our bodies after we've gone through the work to have bariatric surgery, I didn't do that, but I have responsibility for my own addiction. I have responsibility for my recovery. I have a ton of responsibilities in my life, just like you do. And if you've had weight loss surgery or lost weight, you have the responsibilities associated with that in order to maintain your health. So if we refuse to accept the responsibilities that go along, and if you refuse to accept the responsibilities that are associated with living a healthy bariatric lifestyle, but you're out there pointing out what everybody else is doing, it doesn't just make you irresponsible, says Andy. It makes you what he says, and I agree, it's called a hypocrite. And he describes a hypocrite as somebody who pretends to do but doesn't do what they expect other people to do. So you've seen the people in the bariatric world who are all out there and they're saying, you got to eat the protein. You got to, get the exercise. You got to, you got to do the got to do's, but they're doing none of them. You've seen the people who are like, you know what? At home, you got to pitch in and you got to be a team player with your family and they're doing none of it. And you can look at me and go, I'm out here preaching all the time. You got to be responsible for how you talk to other people. And there are times when I talk horribly to my spouse. That's called a hypocrite. There are times when I am a hypocrite. But you know what I do when I give into unhealthy ways like that? I accept the responsibility of what I did, and I own it, and I take care of it because I don't want to feel bad about me, and I don't want to push my people away from me. So I say, I did this. This is about me. I am sorry. You didn't do anything to deserve that. So it's, again, not about being perfect, but by God, it's about taking ownership. We do expect other people around us to do things. I expected my children to come home and do their homework. You expect your spouse or your partner to pick up their dirty laundry. You expect, people to do their responsibilities at work and at the job and at home and on the committees. We expect other people to do that. Are you holding yourself to the same standards? Maybe in that area, but what about this area? So, if you don't do what you expect other people to do, I expect my husband to talk reasonably to me, kindly. When I don't do that, I'm a hypocrite. And when I fall short, that's okay, as long as I take responsibility and say that was hypocritical of me. Because remember, when we're irresponsible, we're penalizing the people around us. Okay, this is deep and heavy, right? But here's the deal. Andy says this, taking responsibility for all of you, your past, and in AA, I have a bariatric 12-step recovery Facebook page, free, and every day I do a reading on there from a 12-step book. And it's 12 months, 12 steps. January, all the readings are about the first step, etc., etc. The 12-step groups are all about taking responsibility, cleaning up the past, making your amends, because it's healthy for me to do that. I get my respect back. I get my sense of autonomy back. I get my sense of well-being back. And maybe I give somebody else a piece of goodness in their life as well. But Andy says, taking responsibility for all of you is what ensures that you bring all of you into a relationship. If I'm feeling badly about myself because I'm not taking care of my health, and then I feel guilty and I know I'm not doing what I'm supposed to be doing, I'm not my best. So I'm not bringing my best into my relationship. I'm not bringing my best to work because I know I'm sluggish because I haven't gotten enough sleep, or I'm sluggish because I'm eating too much sugar, or I'm exhausted because I'm eating zero carbs, whatever it happens to be. All of us is engaged in this. From the lies we tell ourselves, which are excuses, which are, it won't happen to me, which are, I mean, we all have a salesperson in our head, right? Quit buying into the BS that you tell yourself. Andy says, our irresponsibility now or eventually robs somebody else of something they deserve to keep. Their childhood, their innocence, their life, their time. Sometimes we cost people financially because we're irresponsibility. Can I borrow this money from you? Oh, but I never pay it back. Irresponsibility upon irresponsibility. Or we cost people relationally. I don't change how I talk to my husband. It's going to damage our relationship. It's going to damage my relationship with my kids because they don't want to see me treat their father that way. Again, he says your IR, your irresponsibility, will become somebody else's RE responsibility. He says every single time it trickles downhill. And he also says irresponsibility always creates conflict. Always. But Mom, you said you were going to eat healthy after you have surgery. I'm still really worried about you. Don't tell me what I'm supposed to do. Conflict. The boss says, you know, you were going to be making an effort to get here to work on time. Conflict. Your sister says, I waited 3 hours for you. You said you were going to show up here. Conflict. So, Andy asks this question, are you currently engaged in something or neglecting something that will, in all likelihood, create a future mess for someone else to clean up? They see it coming. Are you a hoarder? Your people see it coming. They see the messes. Are you spending too much money? Other people see it. Oh, how long before they ask me for money? Are you not following through with your healthy eating? Other people see it. How long before they gain the weight back? So, again, this is from Andy. To move forward, you have to go back and get what you left behind. Did you leave your self-worth behind because you didn't follow through with what you're supposed to do? Did you leave a mess in a relationship because you were irresponsible and you dumped responsibility on somebody? Did you go back and pay back the money you borrowed from them? Did you go back and make amends? Did you go back and, offer to help them move like they helped you move 3 times? So claim it, own your stuff, quit lying to yourself, quit making excuses. And Andy says, and they also say in the 12 steps, and they both use this same word, by doing so, by cleaning up your act, by accepting responsibility for past and present and setting yourself up for a responsible future, you experience a freedom you will not have known any other way. And in the 12 steps, they talk about these promises and the freedom that comes from not carrying the guilt that you know somewhere deep down you done somebody dirty and you haven't made amends. It gives you the freedom to be joy-filled in life because you know you're doing what you need to be doing and you're not dumping anything on anybody else, or you're not setting somebody else up for having to take care of you because you refuse to be responsible for your health today. Yes, you have a disease, but you're not powerless over your actions. Yes, you have a disease, but there are many things you can do, especially if you've had weight loss surgery and you've lost a lot of weight, to make sure that you keep that weight off. Yeah, you're probably going to regain some weight. That's a normal part of the bariatric process. But you are responsible for working on habit development. You are responsible for learning how to stay motivated to maintain those habits. You are responsible to work through any old crap, any old messages, any negative self-talk, like why bother, or I always give up, and this isn't going to work for me. And you're responsible for cleaning up that stinking thinking. You're responsible for going to a therapist if you need to. You're responsible for learning the new skills. You're responsible for learning to set boundaries and say no and stand up for yourself and say, I refuse to give in to whatever. I refuse not to exercise. I refuse to hang out with people who are trying to sabotage me. I will get whatever help I need. If I need to see a therapist or a dietitian or a physician, or I will do what I need to do to take responsibility for my life in the bariatric process and in all other areas of my life. My thinking, how I talk to people, how I react, how I act, how I set up my financial future, how I set up the cleaning of my crap so my kids aren't burdened with it. Take responsibility in all of life, because life does go beyond bariatrics. But you are responsibility for your bariatric care and your life beyond bariatrics. Avoid the doom loop of irresponsibility. Andy says, it's a privilege to be responsible. It is a privilege. I agree wholeheartedly. Being responsible, he says, gives us an opportunity to be the best citizens we can possibly be. In addition, I say it gives us the opportunity to be the best self we can be for ourselves, the best partner we can be, the best parent we can be, the best spouse we can be, the best friend we can be, the best committee member, the best employee, the best team worker. It's a great thing. The more responsible I am in my life, the better I feel about myself and the happier my life is. It is a freedom. Heavy episode, but let me ask you to do this. First, give yourself credit for the ways you do take responsibility. Then literally make a list. Things I need to be more responsible for, and how do I take care of that? Is it listening to podcasts? Is it calling a therapist? Is it getting a sponsor? What do you need to do to become your best, most responsible self? And if you're a really brave person, ask your kids, what do you see me doing that's going to be your responsibility down the road? And then work with them. What do you think I could do to prevent myself from becoming that burden to you or dumping my responsibility on you? That's a good individual. That's somebody who's putting forth the effort. Are you willing? Woo! I love this, and I would encourage you to have other people listen to this, because as you know, this goes very far beyond bariatrics, but it absolutely applies to your bariatric care lifestyle. Thank you for spending your time with me. I look forward to your comments. See you next time. Join the Bariatric Care program too, www.bariatricare.com. Bye-bye.